Brothers and sisters, today's first and gospel readings teach us about trust, faith, and hope. In a sense, these three attributes go hand in hand, and each one supports the other. Without trust, there can be no faith, and without faith, there is no hope. Let me try to explain with an example. I recently had a lengthy conversation with a woman close to pension age who not long ago buried her elderly mother. They lived together and on 2 incomes managed to live a reasonable life. With the passing of her mother, she was suddenly faced with not only the distress of the loss of the one she most loved, but with the potential for significant financial strain for the first time in her life. Will there be enough to pay the bills? How will I do this on my own? For the first time in years, she wondered about her faith in God and whether He would help her, given that she'd been away from Him for so long. Then, out of nowhere, someone she least expected reached out and helped her. His reason was that he felt that her deceased mother wanted him to help her. I wondered, had she come to trust that God would help her? Had her faith in God been reawakened? Would she now have hope that God would continue to provide solutions for her future? Brothers and sisters, 2 of today's readings tell the stories about widows who had very little and how they responded to their situations in trust. These readings, more than anything, teach us about the necessity to trust in God, especially when we reach rock bottom. As Christians, trust is the basis of our faith, which is the basis of our hope. Brothers and sisters, as you probably already know, widows, like orphans in biblical times, were amongst the most vulnerable, as they didn't have a husband or father to look after them and provide for them. You may recall the story of the widow of Nain, who had just lost her only son. To have no husband and then to lose her only adult son was to put her in a very precarious situation. But perhaps not as precarious as our widow in the first reading. She had a son, but he was only a child and was thus dependent on her, resulting in 2 helpless individuals in a desperate situation, preparing to die from the drought-induced famine. When Elijah asked for a scrap of bread, we see a sign of some recognition by the widow of the God of Israel when she said, "As the Lord your God lives." But she also claimed to have nothing to give him. Yet Elijah promised through the God of Israel that the jar of meal would not be spent and jug of oil not emptied. Here we see her take the first step. Though she was a pagan Sidonian, not Jewish, she trusted in Elijah's words from the God of Israel. How many times are we faced with a similar quandary, when we don't have enough, but God is asking us to give of our very little? In these moments, God is asking us to trust that we won't be left without. In fact, as we know from Christian tradition, the best thing to do when you don't have enough is share what little you have, in order to open the gates of heavenly abundance. Mother Teresa of Calcutta was a perfect example of trusting in God when there wasn't enough, resulting in abundant supplies. The woman in the Gospel also gave all that she had. Though Mark doesn't tell us what happened with her, we can be confident that God provided for her in a way that neither we nor her would have imagined. Remember, Jesus, who was God, saw her, recognized her great act, and of course, he would have rewarded her. These 2 widows in trusting gave birth to a faith in God, which ultimately would produce hope for the future. But let us not forget, brothers and sisters, that this faith of ours is never present without the corresponding trials, tests, and tribulations along the way. For if we go back to the Sidonian widow, as the story continues after today's reading, the widow's son suddenly fell ill and died. The widow responded by saying to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God? You've come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son." Her newfound trust and faith was now being put to the ultimate test. Similarly, we shouldn't be surprised if after we make a great act of trust in God, our faith is also tested like fire. It is in these moments that we must not lose hope in a God that does everything out of love. In response to the widow's words, Elijah quickly took the child up to his room and implored God to give the child life. This God did, and Elijah then returned the living child to its mother's arms. The widow responded with the words, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." Brothers and sisters, though we often don't know God's final word and action, we must never lose hope, for nothing is impossible to God, even to the saving of a precious life. Remember, trust leads to faith, and faith to hope. A hope in a God who sees and knows all the good that we do, especially when he has tested us to the limits. The greater our trust, the greater should always be our hope of the final outcome, no matter how bad it looks along the way.